today we have in the house Jaimeo Brown. He's our first hustling artist. And I'd like to call him a friend of mine after today. So he is a drum set player.
No, you family. You
Oh,
family
okay,
already.
that's what I like. I like drum set player, band leader, composer. Jaimeo, please jump in and list all of your accolades so I don't miss anything, please.
I have been drummer, and that kind of began the path to becoming an artist and conceptualist, maybe, if any term that I kind of think about a lot. It all kind of a lot of times relates to conception.
Okay,
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. All right, so let's start with what your musical influences and what led you to a musical life when you were younger.
Yes. So my mother would perform with me on her back growing up when I was a newborn baby. Both of my parents are musicians, so they wouldn't have the babysitter on some nights. So I would be up on the bandstand in a little backpack.
Okay.
And that was living all over the United States because both of my parents worked for the endowment or did a lot of work for the endowment for the arts. And so that therefore we were traveling to different states for residencies for a certain period of time, a year, 2 years. And so I was living in Midwest, born in Des Moines, Iowa, even though I didn't live there really that long initially. I ended up moving to Montana, lived on a Native American reservation in Montana, went to Wisconsin for a while, North Dakota for a while. So it was a lot of traveling. Eventually my family moved to the Bay Area, which is Bay Area, California, which is kind of where I consider home. That's kind of really where I grew up. Music eventually came as a byproduct of me getting into trouble, really, because when you don't have purpose or direction, a lot of times you're going to go towards all of the other options that tend to lead towards some form of negativity when there's not offensive objective direction. And so there was gangs around me in the Bay Area, so I was getting involved in that stuff. Eventually I transferred schools as a junior in high school. They happened to have a band program there, and there was an incident in which I had the opportunity to audition for a high school position. I got in there, and it was one of the first times I had really seen someone my age who had a passion for really practicing. And as a drummer, and I failed the audition, and I was incredibly blown away by the drummer who had been playing since he was young. And that's when I started to connect the idea of me maybe becoming a musician myself, when it was connected to something that I could relate with my age. And there was a community of musicians at this particular school who found it like their scene to actually practice and to grow and to get better and to talk and to listen to records and to play music, and that I'd never been around that before.
I'm sorry. Now,
Yeah.
was this a like a band situation, like not
Jazz.
marching band?
This was a jazz band.
Jazz
This was
experience.
this was a jazz band. So a lot of that was when I first started hearing or even knowing who Art Blakey was, even though it was played in my house growing up a lot, but I didn't really know and connect a lot of the dots there. And it really became the very beginning of me realizing that if I was going to move forward in my life in general, being a junior in high school and being at that kind of point in which it's kind of a decisive point in a lot of people's lives, because that's when college starts coming, and I didn't really have any ideas about college or desire to go, and I started to realize that I could practice. And this drummer, I said, I'm gonna either quit or I'm gonna start digging into what this dude's digging into. And I started practicing. 5 hours, 6 hours a day. I started to become addicted to this process of growing. And you're by yourself too, so you're having to now face your own. You're facing yourself a lot when you're in a room just with some drums, and that really saved my life. Really, that saved my life, because after that, all of my grades in school started going up to A's, because now there became this reason why I should put energy into school, which at that time became to get an opportunity to go to college for drums. Sure. And to pursue that. And then all of a sudden, okay, I'll do science, I'll do math, I can do that. I mean, before there wasn't a reason, but this made it a reason.
Gave you a purpose.
Gave me a purpose.
Sure.
And that really also started connecting with spiritual path that I started to really explore at that time, and just digging into myself, you know. And my parents really were huge in the sense that they gave me drumsticks, but it's almost like I had to develop it outside of their world. That's how it became more personal to me, and I could own it myself.
Sure.
So they were huge in terms of all that I heard growing up, and influential in terms of being fed growing up with what you're listening to. But there was a significant separation in terms of how I saw music and what I was trying to develop on my own. And that was probably the beginning of everything, you know.
Yeah. You said something in there that was really, it kind of hit home when you said that when you're in a practice room and you're in there and you're facing yourself a lot. Can you just speak a little bit more about that? Because I don't think people really understand the process of getting through musical issues every single day when you are spending that type of time in a practice room. Maybe just sort of like the healing that you go through as a musician, and, you know, facing yourself and your obstacles.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, because of all of your accomplishments through the labyrinth of getting through the system of education and things like that, and growing as a musician in general, when you're practicing by yourself and you're in that process of growing, you have to be able to identify weakness, and that's what growth is. Growth is being able to identify weakness and then to be able to strengthen weakness so that it's no longer weak. And so that's a humbling process. And whether it's trying to increase the dexterity or speed of your left hand, which was an issue that I had grappled with for many years, or it's just something maybe internal, which is the reason why you keep procrastinating dealing with your left hand, which is something that's more internal, that's dealing more with character. And so both have to be reckoned with if you're going to
get that left hand
or and get to this goal.
Right.
If you are going to set a goal. And so, you know, I looked up a lot to jazz musicians, because jazz musicians, you know, John Coltrane was probably one of my biggest influences in terms of a musician that influenced my life. And real early, I realized that he was practicing 8 hours a day, and his practice was really more of a holistic practice that I got. What I got from him is that his practice, his music, and his character development and his spirituality were kind of like one entity. And so therefore, when you're learning about music, you're also learning about something bigger than music at the same time, which is why it can become so all-encompassing, because of you're learning about life as you practice. And I think that all has to do with your focus. And my first drum teacher, Sly Randolph, who was from Harlem, was blessed that I was able to have him as my first drummer, and he had this very spiritual connection to groove, and how the importance of groove, and just we're not going to a whole bunch of chops and fancy stuff. We were just going to deal with playing this quarter note and make this quarter note make anybody dance, right? And so that's a very it's a something that it's a feeling thing. It's not something that you can just write in a book.
Sure.
And transcribe.
Sure.
So yeah, that was really, I think, the roots of where I found what I wanted to do with music, really, opposed to just playing music. Like what this can be used for. Of course, high school, started listening to music a lot. Art Blakey, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones. These were drummers who were in my peripheral and focus. Dennis Chambers. I was listening to Bernard Purdy, was a huge one. Listening to Chungito. Listening to Zakir Hussain, who was also in my house a lot, because my mother taught him his children music lessons. So a lot of different styles. And so that really was a lot of the engine of my education in general. So when I started the process of going to William Patterson, and actually being in an institution where music was taught, right away I realized that there was a different energy that I was receiving from the idea of having to grade music, the idea of having to teach music in a uniformal curriculum so that it would be fair and balanced and all these things that are good. But I realized that process of education, I had to protect something, because in analyzing music and transcribing it and a lot of these things, it was all very cerebral. And that was great. But within that arena, I found that the teachers were there to not nurture you in the same way that I learned what musical
expression
nurturing was. And I don't want to say that over the board, because there was exceptions to that, and I had a lot of incredible professors that gave me a lot. But I just found myself sometimes seeing people who lost their passion for music, being in that setting because of that system of institutionalized music education, which I think has its amazing positives and negatives.
I think just to add to that a bit, because I kind of made it out to the Central Park Roomba Jam. And when you're doing that in an academic environment, you can't get the essence of what it's really like to be in that space, doing that thing. So I was playing this really simple, not simple, because it's not simple, right?
Yeah.
In academia, it's simple, one E, a two E, you know, right?
Right.
On the street, it's not that.
Yeah.
There's no, it's not quantifiable, you know, it's all about the feeling and the essence. And so I got my first true lesson yesterday. Out of all of that schooling, out of 4 years of studying that rhythm, the first time I actually really got to do it was yesterday. You know, so anyway,
that's beautiful.
Now it was really
that's beautiful.
It was amazing experience. So anyway, just to add to that, so you're at William Patterson, and you are analyzing, you are doing the cerebral part of music, and so when you finish your degree at William Patterson, now what's your thought process? Where are you thinking immediately, I'm going to go to the next phase of my academia, or I'm going to go out here and I'm going to be a hustling, you know, jazz drum set player? And try to just
it's a great question. It's a great question. I would say that what I learned early on was that in order for me to thrive in that academic setting, I actually had to create a space for myself outside of the academic space for me to receive what I needed in order to thrive in it. So I would be in New York at nighttime, and I would be going to jam sessions, or I would be going to clubs. I would be checking out music. And that became the majority of where my music education was really actually happening. The college experience had to be secondary for me to the street experience. And so that was developing. I was already in college focused on working, and I don't need anybody's A+ before I'm qualified to work and to start being part of that. And so that was developing all the way through college. So when college ended, to me, that wasn't really a significant moment for me. The significant moments were happening with the people that I was performing with, and all of these incredible musicians in New York who were giving me the education that was fueling me wanting to go to college in the first place, or at least to continue to grow, or just to be in New York. Because when you go out to New York, or when I moved from New York out to California, you know, it's mean. And just being able to have a place to stay and a place just to make sure you can keep everything going forward. And so when college ended for me, it wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to start to try to work. It's like this process had already started all the way at the beginning of my college experience for me. And I saw a lot of people who didn't have that perspective. They were trying to master the education. And then when education would be done, now I start my process. And most of them don't play music anymore, or observed a lot of them stopped playing music because there wasn't this really easy situation where they could just go into and they'll use all this information that they have and now filter it right here. And that may happen maybe for other fields. Like I know that within within different fields of music, there's different ways in which that business network works that is maybe tied to educational in slightly different ways and things like that. But at least within the jazz world, which is what I was trying to do, I was listening to, at that time, you know, I was trying to be Art Blakey, and I was trying to be, you know, listening to Kenny Garrett, and I was listening to all these musicians that were kind of relevant at that time. And so it was just like, okay, I'm done. Cool. I'm glad I have this huge main portion of energy that I'm placing over here, so that now I can really put time into it. That was how more of what the energy is like. Yes, now I don't have to deal with this school anymore. Now I can really focus on music.
Word. So you were like, okay, I can get that off the plate. Now I can really do what I want to do.
Now I can really focus on music.
Okay.
You know, which is what I wanted. I wanted to practice.
Yeah.
and I wanted to grow, develop as fast as I can. And at that time, there were certain things in college that felt like were holding me back from from the music, actually.
Sure.
So, but no, I mean, now in retrospect, I'm so glad that I did that, because in terms of composition and in terms of a lot of these other skills that you eventually may not realize that you'll want to have, they become extremely valuable. But you know, that was the feeling at that time.
Okay. So you're out of college and you're playing, hustling. Now, what's Jaimeo's day? What's your day? What are your days like? If you're the gigging freelancing artist, and if you could speak to that drummer that's like, you know, sitting at home, that's listening to those albums and saying, I think I want to go into, you know, drum set, and this is what it's like. What is it like in New York City for a jazz drum set artist to exist?
Yeah. It's so diverse. What I find is that artists in general are like entrepreneurs. They have to create, you know, with you're in your corporate world, you have a structure that's already laid out for you. And you know this position now goes to this position, and everything is like, great, got the raise, got the next thing, going up the next position.
6 months.
6 months. Hey,
yeah.
It's all there. It's all clear. You can see the end of your life, in a sense. But the entrepreneur or the artist or jazz drummer, you have to actually create your own structure, and then climb your own structure. And so, depending on what people's goals were, or people's personalities, I saw a lot of different types of structures that musicians or jazz musicians created for themselves. Large spectrum, from people who just wanted to play and focus on music to people who, you know, that's where education could filter in a lot of different types of ways, depending on what a person, how much a person really liked to communicate with younger people or students or things like this, or how much a person wanted to learn about music also was going to determine a little bit of that structure. For me, what my approach was I knew there were some fundamentals, which were, I knew that I wanted to be a performer. And in order to do that, there was going to have to be a certain level of practice and development in that could not afford to be neglected, or else you're just not in the game, period.
Right.
You got to have a certain amount of language, you have a certain amount of technique, you have a certain amount of understanding about your environment, your business environment. But then for me, there was always a very strong sense of sharing the things that I was learning. So I never found myself in an official teaching position as a music teacher, or as being hired by the board, or things of this nature, but I always found myself gravitating towards young people who needed the information. So I ended up finding ways in which I could easily reconcile the time that it took to practice and to develop this music with maybe doing after school program things, where it's 3 to 4, 3 to 6 or something like that, and it's a time in which it's only 3 hours a day. So I can give in that, I can share, it can be a source of income, it can be just something that works with the overall vision. So I ended up developing a system of music education really for myself and others, I guess, and that became my nine to five, so to speak. I guess in addition to just final thought in terms of like, what does that look like in New York City in general? It's just New York City has people who are coming from all around the world to perform or to do something very specific. And so that intensity really is addictive to be around
Sure.
because there's just such a growth. There's such a quick growth that can happen when you're around other people. So a lot of my time was just being around that energy in New York City. And man, it's there's no place that I've been to that has that type of energy and just never settling, always pushing ahead, always trying to go higher.
So as a young artist, you should definitely expect to do a couple of things. You should expect to practice so that you can even be in the game.
Yeah.
You should expect to find sources of income that work with your you mentioned vision, and we're gonna come back to that.
Yeah.
But that work with your overall plan and goal and what
Yeah.
you want to do.
Yeah.
And then you should also create a structure for yourself and understand that that structure has to be built and also executed by you.
Excellent. And that takes discipline.
Yes. He just laid it out in like 30 seconds, like it's so easy, but
That's it.
no, I definitely get you. Okay, so from those experiences,
Yeah.
now take me through the process where you're saying, okay, I want to go back, I want to get my master's, I want to study, I have something that I really want to kind of get at here.
Yeah. I was really at the time when I thought about considering getting my master's, there's a great drummer named John Blake who had gotten his master's, and he communicated with me about a particular fellowship that was available. And there is a fellowship that I received called the Ralph Bunche Fellowship. And Ralph Bunche was a civil rights activist in the 60s who also was a part of the United Nations. He had connections to the United Nations, and really interesting dude. And I ended up applying for this grant. I decided that if I wanted to go back, I decided that if I wouldn't have to go back and be in a huge amount of debt,
Yes.
that, okay,
Yes.
let's do this. And because debt will take away a lot of your passion.
Right. Yes, you can. Absolutely.
And so I ended up getting selected for this fellowship, and it was immediately there was a responsibility that was put on me because of this particular fellowship, because there's money that's being given to me, and this money is being given to me by someone who has this legacy that has to do with civil rights, and it has also to do with these two elements of civil rights and also United Nations, and these two things kind of stuck with me throughout this process. And so I had the opportunity actually to go, and I realized I'm going to make sure that this time is going to be used extremely purposely and efficiently for myself. That led me to almost to edit my time there to research and to composition. And that was really the main reason why I went back in terms of what my focus was going to be.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So what came of that? This immense pressure because of this fellowship and because of who Ralph Bunche was, right? So what came of this this return to school?
So when I went back, there wasn't I definitely felt, when I look in retrospect now, I see that there's a lot of things that came from it that I didn't even consciously do, that now when I look back, I say, wow, that's amazing that happened in regards to maybe fulfilling a purpose of this fellowship for my life and things like this. It wasn't very, I wasn't thinking necessarily, okay, now I'm going to go back and create this project that represents this experience. But what happened is there was a bunch of little pieces that started connecting, which was I definitely had a huge desire to learn about the blues, and I had a desire to learn about the very first origin of the blues, which was, in my mind, it was the Black church. And so I decided I was going to do my thesis on how the Black church affected jazz music. And there was a community called the G's Bend community who's from Alabama. And I came across some music that a friend of mine named Howard Wiley shared with me, who's a great friend of mine who I grew up with in the Bay Area. And he just shared with me some recordings that he'd found of this community, and they're just singing these spirituals. And when I first heard the spirituals, right away, it became essential listening material for me. I would listen into it in the times in which I needed the most strength or clarity or hope or power. And so I decided to use a lot of that content to lead me to my research. Yes.
Now, you coming from the Bay Area,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, did you have very many like church experiences like that where you had heard that type of music growing up? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess because I was moving around so much, there was never a home base of this is, but my growing up listening to the music that I listened to growing up, which is what my parents were playing for me, that was everything connected to it. So whether it was very strict gospel music that we are being exposed to in terms of the music itself, or we're just listening to blues music being played by Willie Dixon, or you hear it in Sly and the Family Stone, you hear it in Jimi Hendrix, you hear it in I've been listening to Shuggie Otis recently, you hear it. So it's almost like it was in everything that my parents found valuable. And I did go to churches growing up, maybe occasionally, because being musicians, a lot of times musicians will always find themselves in church, but my parents didn't really go to church consecutively, because, we were so mobile that it's more of a community oriented experience a lot of times. So it almost was like bringing me home to something that
you've always experienced.
Yes, I'd always experienced, and moving around so much, it kind of helped me to come home in a sense, after being so moving and so mobile. And I don't know why I was so, in some reasons, I was so drawn to it. Some part of it is stuff that I can't explain to myself, that I think has to do with history and your roots and your DNA and stuff that's being passed down in you that you may not even know what it is.
Where it came from,
how
it's
why
hitting
there.
You. Yeah. One thing that you said is that you started to figure out the purpose of why you were playing music.
Yeah.
If you could, just because I'm always curious about this transition in artists in particular, can you take me from that moment, or it's probably not a moment, it's a process, right? Yeah. But the process when you stop seeing yourself as a drummer that you grew up idolizing, to this is what I got to do, this is what my purpose is, and this is what I'm going to focus in on. I don't see myself within anybody else. I see myself as myself.
Well, there becomes a time, I believe, when there rises to the surface in you the idea, or what rises to the surface in every human being, I believe, are what values are you going to live for? And those values, I think, end up defining something about you. And you're young and you're trying to find yourself, you're trying to emulate, you're trying to be something that you see as great because you're witnessing greatness and things like this. And then you start going on this process of maybe trying to become this greatness, but then you start realizing that there's a lot of different paths that people take, and they can maybe seem equally valid. You find contradictions in this person totally looks at life or music this way, and this other person is the opposite, but they may have both really strong voices. So in the midst of that and being around a lot of different people, you begin to stand, you have to start standing on your own 2 feet. And and I think what that is your values. What values start to surface so that you are able to stand yourself in the midst of all of these loud voices that you're around or that you're in. What things are you willing to really stand for? And what things are the things that really heal you? What are the things that really empower you as an individual? And how sustainable are those things really that you're getting this fuel from or this power from? And that really, I think, was the essence of me being able to stand, knowing what I'm going to build, is really following those things that gave me the power to continue to be in a certain environment that was so competitive and over time, continuing to be in harsh environments is going to cause you to learn where your strength is going to come from, and you can't cheat that. That's going to be what it is. That you can't copy somebody else's way,
right?
Because if it doesn't really work for you, it's not going to sustain you, and you're going down.
Yeah.
And you start to become proud of that, and you start to want to share it, because perhaps that will be able to help someone else stand. And that really was a huge, just as big as anything else, is finding what helped me to stand, but now let me be able to share this because I owe it to share it because of what I've discovered. And that really is a part of a huge history of the Black experience in America, and what was dealing with in slavery, which is people were learning how to stand in some extremely harsh, traumatizing environments. And the idea of being able to use music as a way to persevere, and a way to endure, and as a way to heal, and as a way to build up, and as a way to transcend, that theme to me, I started to extract because it became real in my own life. It became my life. I started to, you can feel as an artist, as an entrepreneur, when you just feel like you're constantly climbing or you're on a tightrope without a net. And how are you going to keep moving forward and progressing? Where are you going to draw that strength from? Where are you going to really draw that energy from? And
unlike almost any other spirituals work songs, this type of thing, almost like unlike any other musical expression that I've been able to enjoy myself, is that within those recordings, I can still hear the emotion and the pain. It doesn't, a recording, sometimes when you record something, you lose that emotion, but this is ever so present, even in a recording. It's obvious emotion, pain is here. You know, it's potent. You know, it's a potent experience. And I think the way that you're thinking about it is actually quite brilliant, right? Because when you take this and you extract and you put it in music of today and you catapult it for, you know, the future, and you say, okay, this is something that existed, this is something that happened, here's for your ears. I don't want you to forget. I want you to have this as an example so that you can go forward and be a beacon. I think it's a real brilliant, really brilliant thing.
Well, to me, the incredible thing about especially about the particular spirituals, because there was so many different types of spirituals and churches, and the denominations determined a lot of times the way that the music progressed and moved, and the different African elements that were actually able to be translated into America in different types of ways. But at least in a lot of the spirituals that really struck me was hearing the pain, exactly what you're saying, but also hearing the hope at the same time. And hearing those two things together, like hearing the pain, but despite the pain, the hope, that really is applicable, I think, to generations moving down the line. Because it's revealing a power there. It's revealing something there that we can define, that we can discover ourselves, and we can utilize ourselves. So yes, those two together, that the pain and the hope, and that's what I always really try, I think, subsequently to express when I'm creating, is that the hope actually becomes louder than the pain. You know, that's something that must prevail for me in the expression of it, because it's easy to get caught within just the pain, which can just lead to anger.
Sure.
That's what pain turns into anger, unless there's a way to actually convert that energy. And I think about that idea a lot, energy conversion, when I'm thinking about the spirituals and transcendence. It's like they're converting energy. It's brilliant what they were doing. They were converting trauma into hope. It's raw. To me, it's like raw emotional experiences. It's really just raw energy. And it's shaped by how it is that people define it. But you can redefine it and turn it into something else. But because it's just raw energy, that hope has the same intensity as the anger.
Do you feel like this was what Transcendence did to you?
Completely.
This is how 100%. It got you hooked.
This is how it got me hooked. I started realizing energy converted. All the things I started going through that were difficult, I realized that I could use it. I could use it to fuel me. I could use it to fuel composition. I could use it to fuel the opposite of that, which is indifference. You know,
not to get too far off topic, but I hadn't thought about the hope, and maybe it's all in the way that I've experienced these work songs, you know. But in what you're saying, in my personal experience, if I've been with my grandparents, they work in the field. You know, there's still sharecropping going on in Mississippi. So all the way now, today, you can go there. So they work in the field. And in this community, everyone is a farmer. This all day long, working in the fields. And they would go to church, and the call to worship, the very first thing that I would hear every week sounded like moans of exhaustion, pain, like, and what you're saying about conversion. So now in my mind, I'm thinking back on it, like, well, that's not what that was. It was a conversion of that week, of everything that had happened that week, and they're able to take that energy and they're able to convert that into something positive, and then have church, and then go home and have energy to do it again for another week, you know, and to give, you know, that's really, you know, it's really, really, really interesting. Because if you're not careful, you'll see that as just pain plopped down, You know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I have to examine that a little bit more.
Very true.
Within myself.
And once again, too, there's different thoughts, there's different philosophies that are going on there. And in terms of maybe the because what it is you're going to hear the reflections of people's philosophy of life, or what life is. And once again, a lot of the stuff that I was like, being down in Alabama, the Geesben community in particular, they were very connected to the Martin Luther King perspective and mentality of dealing with the trauma and the struggle, and in general. And that particular mentality is not everybody. That mentality, you know, one of the Reva Mosley, who was one of the women who is singing on some of these spirituals, which is also on my album. She's on there. You can hear her singing on some of the songs. She said that, you know, she would be in the fields, they would be in the fields, and they would begin to sing about, they'd be singing in the field, these spirituals, and sometimes they were able to convert the energy until they would become elated with joy, crying in the fields out of joy, because they were tapping so deep inside something in themselves where they became free of not just the experience of the difficulty that they're doing in the moment, but the experience of life itself. And I guess the idea that I'm trying to express is that that comes through certain types of, it is a long subject that I could talk a lot about, but it really is a different way of converting the energy that definitely Martin Luther King and that particular camp of philosophy was, which is, we're not going to be overcome by darkness, but we're going to overcome darkness with good.
Can you just, I know you can talk a long time about it,
yeah,
but because I'm thinking about it too. I'm thinking
sure,
about
sure.
What's, because you used a term when you first started. You said, I'm a conceptualist.
Yeah.
You know, do you think that this process of converting energy, and then we'll move on from here.
Yeah, sure.
Is also tied into creation, right? So when you create, you know, after you've tapped into that energy and you're converting it and you're creating this beautiful thing, we can make this a bigger than just music, but
sure.
When you're creating these beautiful sounds and you're converting this energy into, I don't know if you think of it as an art, you know, but it is an art, you know, when you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about creative energy and how the releasing of this conversion somehow ties those two thoughts together. Yeah. Where creative energy and converting energy kind of connect in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first thing that I would say, especially to someone who's writing music or trying to compose or creating music and trying to reach maybe for these types of ideas in the writing or creating process, even if it's not necessarily music, is that it comes to me from a place that your intellect is not necessarily so involved. And so there is definitely conception that, like I said, I think about in terms of, but a lot of times that conception happens after the fact. What I mean by that is this: when I'm writing something, a lot of times I'm writing or I'm searching for sounds if I'm at the keyboard, and I'm following more of something internally that allows me to feel a feeling. And that process is very raw and it's very organic. It's not something that I can control with my conception. When I wrote when I write all this stuff, it never was like, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to mix this with this. I'm going to mix this with this and this and this and this. It never was that.
Just organic.
It was, yes, let me get into a place where I can just not be afraid to make mistakes. not feel like I have to create a masterpiece, not feel like I have to do any of these things, but let me just honestly express and create the essence of this emotion. And so for me, I'm careful sometimes about over intellectualizing the process of composition and how it is that I write, because if there's something that's so much deeper that comes out of our subconscious, I think, than our conscious. So I just try to make sure I practice all of these skills. I try to make sure that I understand harmony and rhythm and all these things, so that when I sit down, I'm not being limited by by technique, or the technique, or the brain. If I'm hearing something, that I can actually hit it and not take the time to try to figure out what it is. And so I think that for me was a very important process. And what you believe, like what it is you are spiritually, what it is that you are reading, what it is that you are made up of, it's gonna come out. You can't create spiritual music. You have to be a spiritual person and then write music.
Right. Okay. Yes. Can you say that again loudly? A little louder.
You can't write spiritual music. You have to be a spiritual person and then write music. It's gonna come out. That's the authenticity of it, is that you can't control it, and people feel that. People can feel if you're trying to be overly, something that you're not, and so in researching a lot of this material, I was just focusing so much on the content and the struggle and the real human stories that were actually happening in that time, and connecting those stories with the best way to stories that I could relate with myself, and trying to honor those stories, and then so therefore it started to spill out, and that's what happens to all of us. I think we absorb information because of what we love, what our passions are, and there's a point in which it starts to spill out, and I think that's the moment that kind of begins to really define what we were speaking about before, about being when you start to really stand. It's when it comes out. It's like it starts spilling out of you, in a sense. And there may be a lot of things that feel disconnected in that process, I think, of growing and learning, and you're getting this information. But I think it's my belief that there is a moment when all of a sudden there's a time when all those dots begin to connect in you, and it begins to have to come out. And now you have authority and boldness to do things.
There's a moment, even if some artists don't go through the spiritual changes and the spiritual dive that you've gone through.
Yeah.
We all experience and whether or not we take the challenge or not, we all come up to the mirror.
Yeah.
And we say, either you're going to get out of the way, or you're going to turn around and go the other way. You know, and so we all experience that for a moment, and then we have that moment, and we have to say to ourselves, in order to do this, we have to be the best absolute version of yourself that you can be. However you can get there.
However you can get there.
So with all this, I mean, I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to talk about, just so people can see how hard this hustle has been for you. So from the roots of this idea, before it was an idea, it was just a baby carrot of an idea, to now, how much time have you put into Transcendence? And I know you can't quantify that. But you can't, like, just a general idea, so people can understand the arc of what success is. And,
Sure. And as you said, I mean, I see it as something I've been working on my whole life, because that's really what it is a product of in terms of my focus and things like that. But I guess 2011 was when the first ideas started to come about musically in terms of the group, and that came in the form of a record deal eventually in 2011. Ended up putting out an album that at the time was very raw, and I had no idea how it would be received, and it ended up being received in a way that encouraged me to keep going. A lot of positivity from the reviews and things like this, and that led to beginning to tour with it, and I began to tour around the world and develop the concept. Very homemade process, and I used a lot of the ideas of quilting.
But I just want to stop you so people really understand what you mean by homemade process, because you can be very humble. How much of that work you really put in?
Yes.
Like, I'm gonna sit behind this computer and figure this out.
Yeah.
Really take us into that now.
Okay, yeah. When we're talking about hustling, we're talking about the hustling hats. Yes, so there's of course the music hat of practicing the actual drums, right? There's the technology hat of learning musical equipment like Pro Tools, sampling equipment that we use on stage to be able to produce the actual sounds of a lot of the spirituals and singers, which we don't. Sometimes we have used live singers, but this stuff is music where we actually need to hear a lot of the samples. So figuring out ways to integrate technology into live performance, hours and hours and hours of thinking and conception and conversation with my co-producer Chris Scholar, and figuring out how to actually pull certain things off that we'd never actually seen in a live situation. There's dealing with management. Okay, so now figuring out how to learn about being a team builder, and so that's figuring out how to make sure that that the message of transcendence is being communicated to the outer world now, because now there becomes representatives of people who are saying this is what transcendence is and this is what it is not. And so a lot of hours in trying to figure out the right team members that go in those positions so that hopefully the right story is told to the world, because it's a story where it has to be told right, because the meaning is within the story itself. And there's dealing with the promoters who are definitely going to be looking at you, especially if you haven't been a band leader or this before, who are looking at you like, who are you? We don't know your name. How are we going to trust that when you come and play here that you're going to fill up seats, bottom line? So are you now ready to be looked at as if you are nothing in the eyes of people who actually make money from the business, even though you might have spent years and years developing a particular craft? But that doesn't matter in the business world. Your skill level and your artistic level or crafts musically has no impact on selling tickets or getting promoters to actually book you in places. Nothing. They are not related. Make sure that they are completely separated in your mind. The quicker you do that, the less you'll feel offended when you now are in that dog pound where there's
That's a good way to describe
competition and
it's all about money.
All about money. That's a totally different subject in terms of how it is that the performing musician is going to be making money from touring or performance in general. There's dealing with the promoters, there's dealing with the booking agents who are actually making money from you because they make, of course, percentages from you, but also they have agencies in which you become a commodity to their agency. And so there's deals that can happen that you're not even aware of regarding you or Transcendence that is affecting where you're performing or how you're performing or how much you're being made or how much you're making. And being aware of what is going on there so that you're not taken for granted, and that once again the message is not compromised, and also that your band members are treated the way that you need them to be treated, especially when you're trying to live in a certain way of authenticity and maintaining this positive place. Band leading itself in general, just trying to make sure that everybody's happy and everybody expectations are met, and that everyone feels as if they are treated the way they deserve to be treated, takes hours of thought in time to then you have dealing with the label, which is your brand is kind of the commodity, or maybe sometimes your name is the commodity in sometimes of way to them, and they're looking at you as of how many CDs you have sold for them. So their way of looking at your vision or your music or what you are in general as an artist is going to be very different. So figuring out how to make sure that that relationship feels balanced and healthy, and that everybody's expectations are going to be met there. And maintaining that type of thick skin, and dealing with these types of pressures, and then go up on the stage, and now you have to perform. Drums. Oh yeah, drums.
Yeah.
That's what you started
the thing,
with.
Yeah.
That's right. Wasn't that? Oh yeah, this was about drumming. That's what this is about. This is about drum. Oh, I forgot this was all about drumming.
It becomes very small after all you put all those hats on, doesn't it?
And yeah. So hopefully your skills as a drummer are so locked in at that point that you can put on a performance for an audience that's going to make make an impact, even if your emotions are completely, have been demolished.
Yeah.
By the business in some way or another. Emails, trying to make sure the emails are organization, spreadsheets.
Websites?
Websites, online store,
Photographer?
photographers, videographers,
Editor.
editors, social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, trying to make sure that those are being utilized, because a lot of the promoters only look at social media numbers a lot of times now. Some promoters, that's the only thing that they're looking at. So their reflection of you is how well you have maintained your social media. So figuring out how am I going to, do I need an assistant for this? Do I need different roles now start happening? Certain people, some agents are really good at booking, but they're not really good at communicating to musicians, or so you start being able to assess people's strengths, so that you're able to use those strengths in your team for what it is you need to create. So and then making sure that you take care of your two kids properly, and that they have the nurturing they need, and that your wife feels like she has been paid attention to. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And just that balance has led me to get up at 4:30 every morning, and start off with centering and meditation and prayer right off the bat. No choice. No choice. And then from there, start to figure out how that balance is looking every day, assessing that balance, trying to be honest with that balance, because one part of that wheel of subjects, if one part of it starts becoming unbalanced, the whole car can start breaking down. So yes, that the hustle part, I guess, that would be a little bit more literally of what the hustle translates into.
I think that's important to hear, because I think a lot of people see whatever their perception of successful artists, and they just think it's the art.
Yes.
They don't see any of the part behind, the work behind it. So tell me what all this work, since you've put all this work into it, the opportunities that came from Transcendence. Like, I know you got, I saw your TED Talk. Every time I try to get you nailed down, you're in some other country. I don't know. I can't get you in. So tell me how some of these opportunities that you would have never had you not just followed that purpose. That little seed of an idea when you were getting your master's.
Man, the biggest rewards have definitely come in relationships and people that I've met, conversations that I've had. I would say those have been the biggest rewards. I mean, there's definitely been great accolades, New York Times and Vice magazine and or Vice entity, whatever, and or all these different types of magazines and things like that, or being able to play at certain venues that I grew up being able to be like, wow, that's a great place, I'd love to perform there. But I would say that the most rewarding moments have come in new relationships with people who are attracted to the same ideas that I'm excited about and that I'm passionate about. Because that's what happens. You put out energy, but then you start attracting that you start attracting that energy. And that's probably the most valuable reason of putting it out, is when you really care about something, you will learn way more about it if you put it out there, that this is what that this is something that you value. But also respect from people who I have highest. I got a chance to have a conversation with Jack DeJohnette the other day, who's a huge idol of mine, who he showed respect for, some of the music that I had written, and these were people who, like, this is the reason why I actually started playing, and just the feeling of rest when you get something out is huge, because it's like there's a burden until it's kind of released, and whether anything comes back from it or not, just that itself is a big reward, and I would say worth a lot of the struggle just for that process alone. So yeah, and I think those have been kind of what I've noticed that have come back. Money, being able to make money playing music, being able to travel around the world and actually make money traveling around the world. To me, I love traveling. Like, I love getting lost in countries where I don't know, where I've never experienced it. I love unexpected environments that I never knew existed. It's something that I love about music in general. I love creating music that allows me to have the freedom to explore certain doors that we all can find in the moment on stage. That same feeling is what I get a lot of times from traveling, when I'm in Turkey, and then all of a sudden I just go into a random restaurant, and there's a woman singing, I don't know even what she's singing about, but it's so deep and powerful, and then all the power in the building turns off, and now everybody's in this building in Turkey, and the power is off. But I guess it's somewhat common, so they start lighting candles, and the music continues even though there's no electricity, and everybody joins in with the singing in the room to join her singing, and I'm in there singing a song, lyrics that I don't know, and just moments like that take you out of that help you to escape that rat race of things that are, routine and mundane in your life. Like, oh man, like that's the best. Those definitely have to be some of the best moments that make me say, okay, this was worth the dog pound.
Last, because I I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell, and I know you've been doing this since 2011.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us, tell me, tell everyone that's listening, what is transcendence?
Yeah.
What is it?
Transcendence is history. Transcendence is art. Transcendence is technology. Transcendence is not limited by genre. Transcendence is ancient. Transcendence is futuristic. Transcendence celebrates music, the power of music to transcend incredible challenge and opposition. Transcendence is spiritual. It's jazz, it's hip hop, it's blues, it's rock, it's a philosophy. It's kind of become a philosophy and a movement to me. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of behaving to me. So yes, these are all different ways that I've experienced it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, boy.
I 100%.
Thank you.
This has been so healing for me.
Yes.
And I hope
yes.
that people out there listening really take what you're saying, and really, internalize it.
Yeah.
And sit with it for a bit, because I think everything that you said today has been 100% truth, fact, and from the heart.
Yes.
As always. Is there any social media that you'd like to to drop down?
Yeah, I mean, you can find, my name is spelled Jaimeo. Jaimeo, and it's pronounced Jaimeo. Jaimeo Brown.
Okay.
So that could be JaimeoBrown.com. That can be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. As long as you know how to spell my name,
you can get to you.
You can get to me.
That's Jaimeo.
Yes.
M-E-O. Brown.
Yeah.
Guys, this has been so much fun for me. I hope that Jaimeo will come back, check in with us in a little bit, let us know what he's doing.
Oh, anytime, please.
How
please.
things are going.
I would love to continue the dialogue.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
That was dope. That was super dope.
Sorry, I was trying to not get too esoteric.
Oh man, that was perfect. I was hoping, I was wanting you to say something. I want you to say something real out there.
This is only the beginning.